welcome, Adam. Really excited to talk to you today about your scaling journey as the founder of Luxury Escapes. I doubt many Australians need you to explain what Luxury Escapes is, but would you like to give a brief, but also just what you love about this business?
So briefly, we are a full service accommodation business with a mostly online presence, but also a large contact centre, and soon to have our first permanent retail presence open. So we do cover the full gambit of travel. Originally started from effectively selling really discounted luxury hotels, but have now broadened that business. So we've got effectively a hotel marketplace, so a big selection of hotels that you can buy 365 days a year, and we sell cruises, tours, experiences, villas, and obviously flights as well. So it's a full service, effectively online travel agent in many ways.
Yeah, awesome. And what have you loved about this business?
Ultimately, we're really lucky that we sell happiness. So we sell, and we've got a super high NPS. So customers love what we do. I think as a result, it makes it a fun place to work because you're essentially we're not selling telco services where people hate you or something like that. So the beauty of what we do is we're selling something people love and something that's inherently very viral. So if we do a good job, we get rewarded because our customers inherently tell friends and family and they had a great time. So we are able to create lasting memories that people otherwise wouldn't have without what our team does. So really lucky to be in a spot that essentially, again, sells happiness.
Yeah. And was primed for Instagram Live.
Absolutely.
Awesome. And can you just give us a sense of the scale of the business? You know, how many staff have you got? Sure. What's your revenue? Whatever.
So we have about 530 odd staff, predominantly Australia. Not only in Australia, but we have teams across UK, US, Asia, India, New Zealand, for example. So we have historically been a predominantly Australian business with about 80% of our sales generated from Australian customers. A big goal for the business is flicking that around so become a 80% global business. Obviously, you've worked in many global businesses, so it's not news to people who have worked in big businesses, but it is a challenge for an Australian business to go global. Australian businesses tend not to, unless you're an Atlassian or a Canva, which was a global business from day one. Australian businesses don't generally do a great job of being Australian focused, taking that model globally. We're hoping we can do that. That's a big focus for us now is rolling out what we do really well for Australian customers to global customers. And whilst we do have some global customers, we want to have a lot more. So that's certainly a big focus. In terms of sort of revenue numbers, we're aiming for $1 billion in what we call TTV, which is total transaction values, or GMV is another way of saying it. Some of the business you've worked at. That's what we're targeting. Travel is inherently a fairly low margin business. So a lot of even a great travel business tends to operate on a net margin of sub 10%. And that's the sort of very best one. So it's a high volume, low margin business, especially when you're selling a lot of flights, which we don't necessarily sell a huge number of flights. We sell some flights, but so we're a higher margin business than most travel businesses, but we're still real compared to call it a SaaS business or other types of businesses where we're a fairly low margin business.
Almost retail type margins.
Yeah, exactly. Or lower than retail type margins in many ways, especially when you're selling, because flight margin can be zero. So if you're selling flights or negative. So when you're selling flights, you obviously can add a service fee on there, and some flights you can get sort of 2, 3, 4%, but unless you're moving significant volumes, flight margin is very low. So if you look at the great travel businesses, the flight centers of this world tend to operate on fairly low single digit net EBITDA margins.
Yeah, amazing. Hard business to run. So maybe that globalization is the answer, but can you just tell us about starting to dive into how you've scaled this business to that size, $1 billion of gross transaction? What were the pinch points? What were the hardest stages?
Yeah, it's not often we reflect on, because I guess it's been a 13-year journey, so it's obviously still going, but there's probably, I think in the early days there's this really small number of us, had Mark, our junior sales guy, and then Josh, the M&A guy, and there's me and Jez, and then a bunch of other people who are really sort of hands-on in the early days. And I think that when we sort of picked up on our original, what we call flash sales model of international travel. So our original business was a local deals business, essentially working with vendors like restaurants and day spas and that sort of stuff, fairly low basket sizes, often sub $100. So the first call it, I can't forget the phrase you used, the sort of pinch point, was when we made that initial transition to overseas travel. We saw a couple of competitors doing it, and Mark, who was our sort of first sales guy, would just sort of go around the world and in a Bintang t-shirt signing up $1 million deals. So that was sort of when we sort of stumbled across what became the original, and the model's been refined a lot since then, but that was sort of the original point. That was supercharged by discovering newspaper advertising. So back in the day, not so much these days, but back in the day, we could spend $15,000 on a newspaper ad and make $30,000 in margin. So sort of a ROAS of, I don't know, 12 or 14 on a hard spend, you get customers and you get customer trust and you get sales. So it was a really great sort of triple barrel win. And that arbitrage over the years got reduced more and more. We still obviously do a lot of newspaper advertising, but it's not the same ridiculous level it used to be in the sort of early teens. So that was the first point. We were a business that was not just travel. And then probably the second point was becoming a travel only business, or travel and sort of experience business. 2017, we did a deal with the Catch of the Day guys where we switched a bunch of assets, and it was a really complex deal, allowed them to be focused on product and sell to Wesfarmers, allowed us to focus on travel. So that was a really big point. And then probably the third one was transitioning in really sort of early COVID from a business that was focused on what we call flash sales, which is short-term promotions, to a marketplace business, or to a hybrid business that does both. And that allows us to really increase our inventory. So we went from having 50 or 60 products on the site to having 15,000. So it really allowed us to massively broaden our TAM and what we did. So those three things, when you look back over 13 years, have been probably the most important things. But as you know, in a business, we're making thousands of little decisions every day, and every single one's accumulating into sort of a bigger beast. But they're the sort of three big ones that when you think about directionally what moved the business.
Yeah, those the ones where you sort of focused on travel as sort of the winning piece. That makes perfect sense. That's almost about focus. That last one sounds a tricky one. Can you talk a bit about, because that's a different business model, isn't it? It's
absolutely,
like and versus very much control end to end with a team. Talk about how you did that, what you were risking.
Yeah,
that's tricky.
You're right, and it was so that the real, if you look at the problems we solve for customers in our flash business, there's two problems. One is we give obviously great value. So most travel sold at parity or close to it. And our flash deals are 30, 40, 50% off. So significantly discounted. So we save a lot of money for customers. But the second thing we give for customers is, that's the obvious thing. The less obvious thing is we give great curation. So instead of having to wade through 1,000 properties in Dubai, we'll have one or maybe two properties in Dubai that someone could buy and be not only great value, but we're saying, oh, stay at Atlantis, or stay at Grand Hyatt, or stay at Sofitel in the Palm, or whatever it was. And you know this is a good property, and we're going to get through all the crap, and I'm going to give you or maybe not crap, maybe just we'll get through the noise. And here's the one or two or three properties, and we tend to rotate through. We give a degree of region exclusivity to certain properties. Yeah. So essentially, what we did as a business was solve the paradox of choice for a customer, and that's one of the great challenges businesses face. Downside to that is you hit a pretty low TAM, because you're only working with one or two properties in a region each time. And this is not uncommon in travel. If you think of the last minute website, last minute, Hotel Tonight, all those businesses went from being a last minute website to an OTA, or online travel agent, because they run out of TAM. So they run out of runway. So we were facing a similar issue in that the addressable market for, call it flash, was maybe a couple of billion for us. Obviously we weren't there yet, but you could sort of see that ceiling. And this has been the case globally. It's not just us. The leading global players, Secret Escapes, Voyage Privé, sort of hit that. Voyage Privé is probably going to get to a couple of billion. Secret Escapes got to $1 billion. And they sort of start not tapping out, but you start having some harder growth times. So we could see that ceiling approaching. But at the same time, we knew that we didn't want to create this massive paradox of choice. That was what we solved. So we don't want to cook the golden goose. So what we came up with was what we think we call a curated marketplace. So we're not going to sell every property in Dubai, because there's thousands of them. What we'll do is we'll curate 20 or 30 of the best property, or a selection of the best properties. And that could be a range of different locations, different price points, quite a few different things. And then we'll curate them for the customer with some inclusions as well. So you're keeping that same Luxury Escapes flavor. So you might get free breakfast, free upgrade, whatnot. So a bit like a Amex Fine Hotels, but not behind a paywall, needing a platinum Amex, which costs $1,400 a year. So we've now got a couple of thousand properties globally signed up with some sort of inclusion, and we want to try to get sort of 5 or 10,000 of those properties. So you've got your great flash deals, got 100 or so, they're what we call great flash deals. But you can go to, if you go to Luxury Escapes, type in London or Nice or wherever you go in New York, and you're going to find some great options for you, 20 or 30 great options with great inclusions that you wouldn't find at your booking.coms or Expedia. So always giving that great little value and that curation, but a bit more selection, or certainly more selection than would have been pre-COVID, pre-marketplace.
Awesome. Big strategic move. And did you risk kind of watering down your quality? What were the risks you took? And
it's probably less about quality, because we still, like, if the hotel wasn't a standard to run as a flash deal, we wouldn't put it as a marketplace deal. So quality wise, because when you think about this, there's 1,000 hotels in London, we might run 15 as flash deals. So there's enough great hotels in destinations that we can fill up a curated marketplace. And if there isn't, let's say it's I don't know, a backcountry town in the Czech Republic, maybe there's one 5-star hotel. That's all we'll put on. So we won't put on a 3-star hostel on there or 2-star hostel on there just to get a hotel on there. We'll still be quite discerning, and we curate every property on the site. So it's being ticked off by someone. So there's a much higher touch than in any other travel website. So certainly any other online travel agent. So we're very cognizant, not wanting to dilute the customer experience. People do trust us. The very rare instance where the hotel doesn't do the right thing. If something goes wrong, things can go wrong in travel. We don't control the end to end. In the rare case where something does go wrong, we'll obviously try and rectify it, but very occasionally it happens, and we'll do our best to help out the customer in that case. But it's pretty rare that there's an issue with the quality of hotel.
Awesome. So that's your sort of almost your strategic decision points and pinch points, if you like. What about the team? Like, it takes a team to grow to $1 billion gross transaction revenue or gross transaction volume.
Yeah.
What were your biggest decision points on that? Like, I work with a lot of founders in the early stages, and like, when is the moment you hire a coup, or you hire your first really senior person who brings more experience than you have, or those kind of decisions feel like really big ones, especially in the early days. Do you look back and go, oh my God, I'm glad we did that, or that was a disaster? Talk about your team and your key hires.
I think so. We were bootstrapped, and we've really been bootstrapped. We did a raise like about a year ago post COVID, but that was mostly secondary / filling balance sheet. So we've never really done a growth round, if that makes sense. So because we've been in all intents and purposes bootstrapped since day one, but especially in the early days, that largely dictates the talent you can get. So you sort of got to be scrappy. You can get friends and family and some good people through luck. You can't, unfortunately, you can't hire that $1 million COO or that $1 million CTO like that. We still don't have that, but like that comes later. We've only recently hired a really high level exec to sort of work alongside me, that is kind of very, very senior. We've got a great ELT, but they've largely to a great extent grown with the business from an earlier period. So we've been lucky that we are pretty good at attracting talent, B, at retaining talent, especially at the sort of called mid to high levels. Also helps when you work in a business like travel that is inherently a great place to work. So there's part luck, part we probably do try, and we also try and find people who match our personality as a business. We're a fast-moving culture. We're a sort of someone's spent 20 years at a bank probably isn't going to be a great fit for us, even just because they're used to a different way of working, used to a different level of support. So if you've worked at a gritty startup, if you've worked at a scale up, that tends to fit well with us. So we try and intentionally recruit people who we think are going to fit our culture and our personality really well, and really as brutally honest as possible with people coming in, letting them know this is the good bits about Lux and this is the bits you might not like, or the hard bits, because no place is perfect. So we've got a great people and culture team, great chief of staff, and we're able to sort of maintain that culture throughout, which has been pretty important in that. But yeah, we probably, certainly as a bootstrap business, you don't get that super high level talent that you get at a VC backed business where you've got $50 million to spend and you go out and get the best people you can. You just don't have the resources to do that in really early years.
Yeah, that's amazing, bootstrapping to such a size, because it was pretty late, that raise, wasn't it? Amazing.
Yeah, and it wasn't really a growth rate. Like, we didn't use that money to go and hire people. That was money to essentially fix balance sheet
Yeah, amazing.
because of COVID. And we still are. So we've also been profitable since pretty much day one. So it's not as if we've had zero money, but we've had to really operate within fairly tight bounds. And that just means not hiring the called superstar. Like, we've got some superstars, but they were superstars we got organically, not superstars we went out and hired as superstars.
So you've grown your own and yourself. What would be your top tip for growing your own talent with scaling? Because that's a trick, Adam.
That's the $1 million question, isn't it?
Yeah. Do you reflect on anything you've done that has helped that journey?
I'm not sure I can think of what. Obviously, you've got to pick the right people and pick the people who match the culture. But leaving aside the initial sort of recruitment, if you're talking about development of talent, I'm not sure I can pinpoint what we've done specifically, other than to let people hire super smart commercial people and let them be commercial. One of the things that annoys me most as we get to a slightly bigger scale is people becoming a bit too much day two, a bit too timid, scared to make a mistake. When ultimately the biggest mistake you can make is not making a mistake. So that's a concern as the business gets bigger, as you get a few more layers in there. But we want to try and hire people who want to be experimental, want to take risks, and will do it. That's sort of part of the business we've tried to build. Doesn't always work, but hopefully we can have more hits than misses.
So it's almost like, listening to that, almost a bias for action.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and not to fail, which is common in innovation, isn't it? But how you give people permission to fail, that's always the hardest bit, I reckon. Like,
absolutely. And it's something that I struggle with, we struggle with every day. And the amount of times we said, like, make a mistake, no one's going to be penalized. Like, no one's going to be told off for trying something, getting it wrong, unless it's like completely ridiculous, but nobody's doing that kind of stuff. But by far the thing that frustrates me the most is lethargy, or somebody saying, I can't change that. That's what Adam wants. A, it's not what I want most of the time. And B, even if it was, doesn't mean it's right. So it's getting over that institutional bias. It's again, as I say, it's bias to action. We're probably a 7 out of 10. We're not far from perfect. We're probably better than the sort of the big 100-year-old businesses, but so we should be. But we absolutely can get better at that, and it's something that we're really conscious of trying to get better at.
Yeah, interesting.
There's a great if you know Steph Bone, who always shows this great video. I think it's an ex-Bain partner. And I think he's got this video called The Innovator. I forget what it's called exactly, but he just goes through, and it's just literally describes almost every business of where the founder sort of stops being involved day to day as much as they were. And then how do you get that founder's mentality across the business, and how do you create a business of entrepreneurs is really hard. And this Bain guy, I forget his name, but Jim, I think, some American guy, he explains it perfectly. And the problem he explains was exactly what the problem that we were facing at the time. And the same problem that I imagine most businesses you work with face is, how do you maintain that constant innovation, that constant growth as you're growing above startup stage?
Yeah. If you find a link, can you send it to me? Because that's
send me, remind me, but I could definitely find it.
That's the holy grail, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a really good video. You go, oh, so true. But it's this guy explains it really well.
Yeah. So you've had a really interesting journey. You're actually your founder scaling up, but you actually did step up for a period. Can you just talk about that? Like, why, how, and what was it like coming back?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like, we were, so this was, I was probably 8 years in as CEO. So and this is sort of every day of the year, 8 years in a row. I did not work for like most founders and this is Christmas Day, this is New Year's Day, it's et cetera, et cetera. So in many ways, I was probably due a rest. At the same time, we were going through and I had a bunch of other stuff as well that I was working on. At the same time, we were going through shareholders have been involved in the business for a while. People wanted liquidity. We're going through a process, essentially a majority sale process. Myself and my co-founder, Jeremy, who already had transitions out of the operations a few years before, were probably looking to sell a majority. And the thinking was, call it across both shareholder and board level, and they were largely one of the same, was we'll get a better valuation, not having a founder front and center, and it's better for the business. And we'll bring in a non-founder CEO to run the business and expand the business, which is, again, the sort of adult supervision that Google did. Plenty of businesses did it. It's not unusual. And I think at the time as well, founders come in and out of vogue for investors. And I think at the time, 2018, 19, founders probably was slightly out of vogue, and they came massively back in vogue during COVID, but they were out of vogue for a period. And I think as a shareholder group, we probably all agreed that it was probably the right call. I think there's probably, was it done perfectly at the time? Probably not. It was probably a bit rushed. Probably didn't give the new CEO enough time in the business to really to understand how the levers operated. So he was sort of handed a bit of a poison chalice in some way. I thought it was rushed as well, so I wasn't fully willing to hand over everything yet because I didn't think there was enough time at elapsed. So but we were running the sale process, so it was sort of the timeline was full. So there's a few sort of reasons in there. In there, we got to a détente between all shareholders and board, and I sort of had that awkward role of sort of call it consultant, executive director, but was in the office quite a lot and doing my best to help out. And it sort of worked. The trade sale process was going, and then COVID happened. So this is about 14 months. So I sort of finished up, I think it was February or something like that, 2019, had a really good year of going overseas and playing golf. I was still doing stuff, but I had a bunch of other, I was raising money for another business. So there was a bunch of stuff I was doing. So it was a good year. And also, and we'll talk about this more in a second, but it gives a lot of great perspective being out of the business, seeing what other people are doing right, what other people are doing wrong, especially at senior level. It's very hard to mark your own homework. So to see someone else in the role was much easier from a holistic perspective. So COVID happened, and it was a really, obviously travel was impacted as much more than many sectors, and it became, so obviously the trade sale process fell away because no one was buying travel businesses, and that turned out to be really fortuitous because when we did the round, subsequently the valuation was significantly higher because the business was significantly better. But the trade sale process ended, and it was probably a 4 or 5 month process where it was just a bit difficult. So I was sort of around, it was high stress, the CEO was doing his best, but ultimately, in terms of decision-making cadence, it's hard to beat a founder in that. So it's always gonna be hard. Even the best sort of outside executive is going to struggle compared to a founder who has not only credibility, but a deep understanding of every facet of the business. So it just sort of made sense to come back which is probably about 6 months into COVID. I think it was around August in 2020. So it was still a poised time in the business. We had come off those really bad lows. So we'd ended that first lockdown. There was subsequent lockdowns still to come, which we didn't know about, but we thought it was on the uptick, but it was still hard. Business was still losing money, et cetera, et cetera. But coming back in the business, and we can talk about this more later, was not only great from a sort of my own perspective, but having been out of the business made me a much better CEO. Leaving aside the trade sale process, so had that trade sale process not happened, how long would I have had in the role, even myself checking out or whatnot? Probably maybe a couple more years, and then it would have been a time, it naturally would have been time for somebody else to come in, because it would have been 10 or 12 years. And you kind of just, there is a time for everyone. But I think stepping out of the business significantly lengthened my tenure to come back in. I think I'm just understand the business better, having exec chaired another business and worked with other CEOs. You kind of see what people do well and do badly. You understand the importance of the huge importance of getting great talent in. So the talent caliber probably dropped off a bit while I wasn't here. And my key focus in coming back in the first 6 months was how do we get this talent better than ever was? We're by far a much better team than we've ever been now. So there had been absolutely people who came along and remained. And then there was probably, if you look at LT, about half the LT left, half the LT stayed, and we upskilled that significantly, then built a really strong second layer and third layer, so SLT, OLT, MLT. So it's a much deeper management, much deeper. And with 540 people versus 220, you sort of need that. But really the key focus was focusing on bench strength and how do we have that really strong cohort of leaders in the business that we sort of half had pre-COVID, but then really focused on them. And it's not until you step out of the business, you don't really realize what you're missing. So that was a huge opportunity to reflect and say, well, this is what we really need to do. And first 6 months is this.
Yeah. And what did how did you learn so much in 6 months gap? Like, because you saw other businesses, you think, or was it partly just gap? Like
Yeah, a bit of both.
or the lessons that you'd had, or
I think it was in the end. I was probably out of the business for about 16 months officially. I was coming to the office quite often during that time, but I wasn't exactly. So that was probably just the right perfect amount of time when you reflect on it. And it was during COVID, so 16 months became really like 2.5 years. If you sort of, but certainly being one of the things I did was like exec chair at a business that we did a couple of fundraising rounds during COVID. So it was a really sort of tough period. Helped me. So I was working on models and all that kind of stuff that founders do that we never had to do in our business because we never need to raise money. So that was super beneficial. Then working with a team and the importance of people. That was one business. There was other. I was mentoring at StartMate and all that kind of stuff. So I was touching a lot of business. I was on I think 8 or 9 boards, and in addition to the mentoring things. So you see a cross section of stuff.
It was benchmarking, really.
Yeah, the pattern recognition. Oh, exactly. So, and I was so, I think pre-COVID, I've never really had many other jobs. So I was a lawyer for a couple of years. Then we had our own sort of initial business, and then we sort of rolled into this. So you just don't get exposure to other business, other stages. It was hugely beneficial in a number of different ways. And there's no way I'd have a long-term career in our business without having stepped out. It was significantly helpful, and I'm super grateful for it because I got to have a really fun year and come back a much better. Obviously, I've still got a lot of work to do. No one, especially me, is perfect. But maybe I was a 5 out of 10 before. Maybe I'm 7 out of 10 now. There's still clearly areas I can get better at, but I think I'm a far more complete manager and strategist in the business than I was pre-COVID.
How do you think a founder who stays could do that? Like, is it external?
Yeah, I think it depends on. Look at there aren't that many founders that stay 10 plus years. Like you've obviously got to maintain a significant degree of sort of voting control. If you look at the Zuckerbergs, the Spiegels, obviously the Cheskys all have super voting shares. So, and the great Chesky's a pretty good example. So there was talk of Brian moving on early COVID, interestingly. He came, then they obviously listed the business, and he's probably now one of the best CEOs in the world. So he's really reinvented himself. I think his ability to look at the example of music, Madonna reinventing herself constantly. I think you've got to reinvent yourself. And a founder CEO is that sort of great product person and the great salesperson. That's the 2 main skills. And you become, as the business grows, you become a capital allocator and talent manager. And you've got to be able to make that transition. And it's a pretty small, and obviously you run some pretty big businesses, and you probably focus on the talent management and probably less on the salesy stuff, although you've probably done a bit of that as well. But it's unusual skills to have all of them, to be the great product person, the great salesperson, the great talent manager. Capital allocation kind of goes a bit with product because it's a little bit one of the same, but it's the people management, the ability to attract talent, retain talent. Mark had Cheryl, who obviously did a lot of that role for him. I'm not sure who Spiegel's got. Chesky's had Belinda Johnson, I think, who's been that great foil for him. I think she's still there. You kind of really do need that great org design specialist who can really manage the team and bring the team. And ultimately the founder, I think the founders should keep focusing on product, get that person who can manage team, focus on LT and product. And that's probably where they can add most value. The great founders tend to stick around, tend to be those great product founders.
Yes.
Jesse's a great product founder. Obviously, Jobs, who wasn't CEO initially, everybody thinks he was, but he came back as CEO, but he wasn't CEO. So it's those great product guys and girls who can sort of keep adding value there, who I think can have those longer tenures.
Yeah. I've now got a picture of you as Madonna reinventing this. Just ruined this completely. Fantastic. All right. I think that's awesome, Adam. I've got that last question of the one piece of advice for scale-up leader. But is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
I think just to read around that, and the Johnson and the Cheryl are the great examples. Being able to have, I think, recognizing that you can't do it all. Like every founder thinks they can do it all, but certainly the org design stuff and the talent management stuff, I think that's the part that trips up most founders. And having that really strong court number 2 or equal or number 2, whatever you want to call it. And often when it's a male, it's a female who comes in as that person, because the male probably lacks that empathy and that understanding. Less of an issue if it's a female founder, but having that person come in, like trying to do everything yourself without that high level support, especially on the empathetic side, is hard. It's really difficult. I've got Julia, who's my chief of staff, who's fantastic at that, who's that foil often between me and my sort of productivities and the team. Obviously, you've got to find someone who's a similar risk profile and can go along for the ride, but can soften the approach. And I think that's probably a really big one to sort of to hark back to your question. So it's getting the right talent around you and really complement. If you're that great product person, you might not need 3 great product people under you, but you're more likely to need that great people person or the great chief of staff or the great sales lead. So it's finding complementary skills and really focusing on what area of the business you can still contribute at. And generally for founders, I think it is product or maybe sales. Walt Piscotto, who's that great sales guy from car sales, his greatest strength was in sales, not so much product. That was Greg Roebuck's job. So Greg focused on product, Walt focused on sales, and they were a great team. And that's what Greg focused on through his career and was a fantastic CEO over a number of years. I think it's working out what you do really well and not trying to. You have to, and I think the great transition is at an early stage, you're doing everything. At later stage, you're just doing 1 or 2 things and just working out where you're adding value. And that's something that I'm still sort of grappling with, but I've got a reasonable idea, but I think that's that big transition every founder needs to make.
I've worked with a lot of founders, massive respect, but I have observed that one of the things that's hardest is that's awesome. You bring in that extra talent, but there's that moment where you disagree with what that new person is saying. They need to restructure, and we've got to take out these golden oldie employees, or and there's those people that you just don't think should ever go. Whatever it is, that moment of truth. Have you had that moment, or have you just been so aligned that you've really just found someone perfect partner?
I think with JD, he's been with us for a long time. I think we're pretty aligned on most things. That we don't agree on everything. I was very firm on back to the office. It took a while to bring the team. Like JD was probably the first to come on board, but it took her a little while. Eventually, the whole LT came on. Pretty much the whole LT came on board, but it took sort of 6 months of convincing. It's a tough one. The challenge with the founder, and I think it's Steve. I think it's Bezos who says founders are usually right about, and that's what sort of makes a great founder. Generally, about 80-90% of the time. So it's recognizing is this the 80% or is this the 10%? Because founders aren't always right. So you've got to be able to back yourself to a point, and that obviously the point of craziness or where it's completely off the charts or you just got it wrong, and recognize where you've got it wrong and pull back, but also recognize that founders do the gut feel of a founder. The reason why founders are founders is they generally have a better gut feel than others. They just make good decisions without necessarily having all the data. So generally backing the gut of a founder is the right thing to do to a point, and understanding where that point is. And ultimately, if somebody can make a really convincing case of something to me, respect the evidence, respect the case, but make someone make that case. Like not simply saying, I want to do this, so we'll do this, but say, Adam, I think we should have work from home because of A, B, C, D, E, and convince me. Unlikely they will, but if they can, they can. But convince me with data and the right way. So be right. Ultimately, the power in any business lies with the shareholding and the voting shares. So we're forgetting CEO, whatever. It's ultimately whether it comes down to board or shareholder. That's where the power always lies in a business. And if that's the same person, if that's a Zuck, where it's both, then ultimately Zuck makes the call. Like if Zuck wants to do a crazy metaverse thing, he can do a crazy metaverse thing. I'm sure people tried to talk him out of it, but they couldn't. He's now realized he's wrong. He's pulling back. Obviously, you don't want to go to that extent because that was a huge waste of resource. But there are times where the founder has to go hard, but also there are times where you have to understand that it isn't the right decision and be able to be convinced of that.
Yeah, beautiful. Is it the 10%? Yeah, interesting. And if you were to say one thing that has helped you grow to still be here, still making the calls 13 years on, what's your advice to a new founder?
Oh, I've got a few pieces of advice for founders, but slightly different context. My first advice is when you're starting a business, don't force an idea, let the idea come to you. Find the problem that's relevant to you and solve that problem. Don't force a problem because it's not going to work. A good founder will let the business come to them and then will drive hard. Second thing is once you've got that great idea or you've found that great problem to solve, don't do a side hustle, do a full hustle. So put your full-time efforts into it, give it a real crack. It's very hard to run a business 10 hours a week on the weekend when you've got kids screaming in the backyard. So it's you've really got to do it full time, put real skin in the game. So in a way they're sort of corollaries, but you know what I mean, I'm trying to say there. But ultimately, once you do have that great concept, that great problem to be solved, solve it properly, and then find great people to help you solve it, and find people that match your culture, whether it's fast moving, slow moving, whatever. Hire people who are going to think not think exactly the same that you think, but think the same way you think, have the same risk tolerance, have the same values, have the same morals. So that's probably the key to building that great team, and then go out and make sure you solve a problem for customers, because ultimately you need to create that value for a customer. And if the value's not there, then there's no business. So there's a few key product team problem solve is probably the really key thing to do.
Yeah, beautiful. That feels like the stuff that is awesome founder advice. Early stages, 10 years in, what's the thing? Like, how do you keep going 10 years in? You think it's the same?
I think you've got to, well, ultimately, if you look at what I do, I can't tell what others speak for other CEOs, and I can't speak what you did when you were running businesses, but like part of my job is still problem solving, is pushing people to solve the problem, pushing people to act in the right way, making sure people are acting in the cultural way that we want them to act, obviously attracting and retaining the right team. But I'm still doing product stuff. I'm still contributing product, trying to contribute product ideas. So it's sort of being over the product and just continually evolving. And still, I think the key is just constantly listening to the customers. And Steve Jobs obviously famous for saying, well, customers will buy this, I'll create it. So not only listening in a reactive way, but also a proactive way. But how do we create products that will solve problems for people? In our case, it's in while they travel. So how do we make purchasing travel easier? How do we make actual traveling itself easier? And that's sort of what I like to sort of work on at the moment. To me, that's a super interesting problem to solve. Ironically, as the business gets bigger, I find it's much easier to be a CEO / founder of a business that's bigger. You got more good people around you. You're not doing 50 jobs. It's just a more, in a way, more enjoyable. Maybe it's a bit less fun, but more enjoyable. You're not as stressed. You don't have to work 365. Well, I still do, but you don't have to work 365 days a year. It's just a slightly different. It's a different environment. It takes a different skill set to a degree, but ultimately the skills of a founder in many ways are still really helpful, especially if it's a product-based, sales-based, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there are times where it's always a challenge. How much do you delegate? How much do you do yourself? Where's that line between micromanage and you see these great stories about the founders that just understand every detail. There is a real benefit to growing up with a business that you don't have if you come in a business later. So knowing where you add value versus where you attract value is a really big constant challenge. But trying to focus on where I can add value, what I do well, and making sure we get the best people to do the stuff that I don't do that well.
Yeah. I reckon that for me is the heart of why it gets more fun, because you get to choose more. You don't have to do your own expenses and this and that. You choose, be more intentional about 100%. Where you spend time. Yeah. Awesome. Adam, amazing story. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.